Power has never been conquered by brute force alone. Throughout history, those who truly shaped the destiny of nations were not merely the strongest warriors, but the most astute strategists, the men and women who understood a fundamental truth. The path to the summit is not built with stones, but with people. And what if I told you there exists a science for climbing social hierarchies? An art refined over centuries, codified by one of history's most controversial thinkers. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli, a man who lived in Renaissance Florence, witnessed the fall of empires, the betrayal of princes, and the eternal dance of political power. He was not a moralist. He did not seek to create virtuous men according to the Christian standards of his era. Machiavelli was obsessed with a pragmatic question. How can an individual conquer and maintain power in a world where morality is often an illusion, and force, by itself, is insufficient? His answer shocked generations. He argued that political success required not only competence, but also the capacity to manipulate perceptions, cultivate strategic alliances, and, when necessary, act with calculated cruelty. But here is what few understand. Machiavelli did not write for sadistic tyrants. He wrote for anyone who desires to navigate effectively through power structures. And these structures exist everywhere. In the corporate office where you compete for a promotion, in the university where you seek the support of an influential mentor, in social circles where reputation can open or close doors. We live in a society that denies the reality of power, yet secretly operates according to the truths Machiavelli articulated 500 years ago. We feel powerless before individuals who seem to effortlessly connect with influential people. We watch, frustrated, as others less qualified ascend because they mastered the invisible art of strategic connection. Throughout this video, we will dive deeply into Machiavelli's writings and extract 15 fundamental laws for creating connections with powerful people. These are not superficial networking tricks. They are profound psychological principles tested throughout centuries of human history. Each law will be philosophically dissected, illustrated with fascinating historical cases, and translated into practical applications in the contemporary world. This is not comfortable knowledge. It demands that you abandon certain illusions about how the world works. It requires that you accept an uncomfortable truth. Those who refuse to understand power are condemned to be its victims. Prepare yourself, for the knowledge you are about to receive is transformative, and once acquired, there is no returning to ignorance. The first law: never outshine the master. The foundational principle of ascending through social hierarchies is perhaps the most counterintuitive. In your eagerness to demonstrate competence, in your desire to be recognized, you must resist the most natural of all impulses, the impulse to shine too brightly in the presence of those above you. Machiavelli understood that power is not a meritocracy. It is a theater of egos, where the perception of threat matters more than actual capability. When you make your superior feel surpassed, you create not admiration, but anxiety. And anxiety in the powerful is the seed of your destruction. This law operates on a fundamental psychological principle that predates Machiavelli by millennia. Human beings are status-conscious creatures. Our brains evolved in small tribal groups where hierarchy determined access to resources, mates, and survival itself. The amygdala, that ancient structure in our brain, does not distinguish between physical threats and status threats. When someone perceives their position being challenged, their nervous system responds with the same cocktail of stress hormones as if facing a predator. The powerful did not arrive at their position by accident. They fought, schemed, and sacrificed. Their identity is intertwined with their status. When you outshine them, you are not merely displaying competence. You are activating their deepest insecurities. You are reminding them that they are vulnerable, that someone more capable exists, that their position is not eternal. Consider the tale of Nicolas Fouquet, the finance minister to King Louis XIV of France in the 17th century. Fouquet was brilliant, ambitious, and tragically unaware of this fundamental law. In 1661, he invited the young king to a celebration at his newly constructed chateau, Vaux-le-Vicomte. It was to be the social event of the era, a display of Fouquet's refined taste and immense wealth. The chateau itself was a masterpiece, designed by the finest architects of France. The gardens stretched endlessly, adorned with fountains and sculptures. The entertainment included a ballet written by Molière, performed before hundreds of nobles. The banquet featured delicacies from across Europe, served on golden plates. Fouquet intended to honor his king, to demonstrate his loyalty through magnificence. But he made a catastrophic miscalculation. The young Louis XIV stood in those gardens, surrounded by splendor that exceeded anything in his own royal residences, and felt not gratitude, but humiliation. Here was his subordinate, living in greater luxury than the king himself. The message was unmistakable. Fouquet possessed resources, taste, and power that rivaled the crown. Within months, Fouquet was arrested on fabricated charges of embezzlement. He spent the remaining 19 years of his life imprisoned in a remote fortress, forbidden from receiving visitors, his name deliberately erased from history. His crime was not theft. His crime was making his master feel small. In the modern corporate landscape, this law manifests with equal brutality, though with more civilized mechanisms. The young analyst who publicly corrects the CEO's statistics during a board meeting, believing they are demonstrating diligence, finds their career mysteriously stalled. The talented designer whose portfolio outshines their creative director's work is passed over for promotion, labeled as not a team player. The academic whose research threatens to eclipse their thesis advisor's lifetime work discovers their papers rejected, their funding applications denied. The mechanisms differ, but the psychology remains identical. Power protects itself, and the first line of defense is eliminating those who make power feel threatened. Your arsenal for navigating this law begins with strategic modesty. In the presence of powerful people, your goal is not to disappear, but to shine in a manner that reflects glory upon them. Attribute your successes to their mentorship. When presenting ideas, frame them as extensions of their vision. Let your competence be visible, but always subordinate to their authority. The second tactical element is timing. Reserve your most brilliant displays for contexts where your superior is absent, or where their position is secure enough that your excellence enhances rather than threatens their reputation. Cultivate the art of making others feel intelligent, insightful, and impressive in your presence. This is not weakness. This is the highest form of strategic thinking. For the person who masters this law does not merely survive in proximity to power, they become indispensable to it. The second law, present yourself as the solution, not the supplicant. Powerful people are besieged constantly by those seeking favors, requesting assistance, begging for opportunities. Their days are an endless parade of need. To distinguish yourself, to create a connection that matters, you must invert the equation entirely. You must present yourself not as someone who needs them, but as someone who solves their problems. Machiavelli observed that princes value utility above all other qualities. Loyalty, friendship, shared history, these evaporate instantly when they cease to serve the prince's interests. But the person who makes themselves useful, who addresses genuine needs, secures a position that transcends sentiment. The psychology underlying this law connects to fundamental attribution error and the economics of attention. Powerful individuals operate in environments of perpetual scarcity, not scarcity of money or resources, but scarcity of time and attention. Every interaction is evaluated through a brutal calculus. Does this person drain my resources or augment them? When you approach as a supplicant, you immediately categorize yourself as a drain. You're asking them to expend effort, social capital, or resources on your behalf with no clear return. The human brain is wired to avoid bad deals. Mirror neurons allow us to simulate others' experiences, and when someone presents need, we unconsciously simulate the burden of fulfilling that need. This creates aversion. Conversely, when you present yourself as a solver of problems, you trigger entirely different neural pathways. You activate the reward prediction systems. The powerful person's brain begins calculating the potential value you represent. They imagine the problem disappearing, the obstacle overcome, the goal achieved. You transform from liability into asset. History provides a perfect illustration in the rise of Thomas Cromwell, chief minister to King Henry VIII of England. Cromwell was not born to nobility. He was the son of a blacksmith, a background that in the rigidly hierarchical world of Tudor England should have prevented any proximity to power. Yet Cromwell understood this second law with crystalline clarity. When he first came to the attention of Cardinal Wolsey, England's most powerful minister, Cromwell did not beg for employment or request patronage. Instead, he identified a specific legal problem that plagued Wolsey's administration. The complex process of dissolving minor monasteries required parliamentary approval and navigating canonical law. Cromwell, who had educated himself in law and finance during years abroad, presented Wolsey with a detailed plan for streamlining the process, complete with legal precedents and procedural steps. He offered not his resume, but his solution. Wolsey, recognizing immediate utility, brought Cromwell into his service. Years later, when Wolsey fell from grace, Cromwell employed the same principle with Henry VIII himself. The king's desperate desire to divorce Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn was blocked by papal authority. Cromwell presented the revolutionary solution: break with Rome entirely, establish the king as supreme head of the Church of England, and thereby grant Henry the authority to annul his own marriage. It was audacious, unprecedented, and exactly what Henry needed. Cromwell rose to become the second most powerful man in England, not through birthright or flattery, but through indispensability. In contemporary contexts, this law operates with particular force in the knowledge economy. The junior consultant who approaches a managing partner not with, "I'd love to work with you," but with, "I noticed the firm is losing market share in the tech sector. I've drafted an analysis of 3 untapped client segments with specific outreach strategies," positions themselves entirely differently. The entrepreneur who contacts a potential investor, not with a pitch deck, begging for funding, but with market intelligence that helps the investor understand an emerging trend they had missed, creates a relationship of value exchange rather than dependency. The academic who approaches a renowned professor not requesting co-authorship, but offering a novel methodological approach that could solve a problem in the professor's current research transforms the dynamic from hierarchical to collaborative. Your practical arsenal begins with reconnaissance. Before approaching any powerful person, invest significant time understanding their actual challenges, not what you imagine they might need. Read their work, study their organization, identify the gaps between their goals and current reality. The second tactical element is the strategic offer. Your initial value proposition should be modest enough to be credible, but significant enough to matter. You are not promising to solve every problem, but you are demonstrating that you can solve one specific problem effectively. Provide proof of concept. Show them a sample analysis, a prototype solution, preliminary research. Make it effortless for them to say yes by minimizing risk and maximizing immediate perceived value. Remember, powerful people do not need more people who need them. They need people who empower them. Be the latter. The third law, master the art of strategic deference, without servility. There exists a razor's edge between respect and obsequiousness, between deference and degradation. Most people who attempt to connect with the powerful fall catastrophically on one side or the other. They either treat influential individuals as peers prematurely, triggering defensiveness about status, or they grovel with such transparent desperation that they inspire contempt rather than connection. Machiavelli understood that power respects strength, but demands acknowledgement of hierarchy. The art lies in demonstrating your value while honoring the existing order, in showing backbone while bending the knee at precisely calculated moments. This law draws upon the evolutionary psychology of dominance hierarchies and the human need for both respect and recognition. Primatologists observing chimpanzee societies note that successful subordinates, those who gain access to resources and protection from dominant males, display a sophisticated behavioral repertoire. They show submission through specific gestures, lowered posture, averted gaze, yielding right of way. But they also demonstrate competence and confidence in their own domain. They do not cower continuously. They signal, "I acknowledge your superior rank, but I am a valuable member of this group." Humans operate with the same fundamental calculus, merely dressed in language and social convention. Powerful people need their status acknowledged because status is fundamentally a social construct that exists only through collective recognition. When you fail to acknowledge their position, you threaten the foundation of their power. But when you acknowledge it with excess enthusiasm, with fawning praise and self-abasement, you trigger a different psychological response: disgust. The human psyche is programmed to avoid parasites, organisms that drain resources without providing value. Excessive servility signals parasitic intent. It communicates that you lack the strength to provide real value, that your only strategy is extraction through flattery. The historical exemplar of this law is Talleyrand, the French diplomat who served successfully under 5 different regimes: Louis XVI's monarchy, the Revolutionary government, Napoleon's empire, the Bourbon Restoration, and the July Monarchy. In an era when most officials were executed or exiled with each regime change, Talleyrand not only survived, but thrived. His secret was perfect calibration of deference and independence. When serving Napoleon at the height of the emperor's power, Talleyrand displayed impeccable protocol in public. He used the proper forms of address, organized ceremonies that glorified Napoleon's achievements, and never contradicted the emperor before others. But in private council, Talleyrand spoke with careful frankness. When Napoleon planned the disastrous invasion of Spain, Talleyrand advised against it, presenting his analysis with logical precision, framing his disagreement not as defiance, but as loyal counsel. Napoleon valued this because Talleyrand's deference in public legitimized Napoleon's authority, while his honesty in private provided genuine strategic value. When Napoleon eventually fell, Talleyrand employed the same formula with the restored Bourbon monarchy. He acknowledged Louis XV's legitimate claim to the throne while simultaneously positioning himself as the indispensable diplomat who could navigate France through the complex post-Napoleonic European order. Talleyrand understood that powerful people collect 2 types of subordinates: mirrors who reflect their brilliance, and tools they can use to accomplish goals. Mirrors are decorative but disposable. Tools that demonstrate both utility and appropriate respect become permanent fixtures. In the modern landscape, this law governs every successful interaction with gatekeepers of opportunity. The young professional seeking mentorship from a senior executive begins every email with appropriate formality, uses titles correctly, and expresses genuine appreciation for the executive's time. But the content of the message demonstrates independent thinking. It does not say, "I'll do whatever you think is best." It says, "Based on my analysis of your recent interview, I believe these three trends will impact your industry. I've prepared a brief on the third one, which seems least discussed, but potentially most disruptive." The deference is structural. The content is substantive. The doctoral student approaching a distinguished professor shows respect for their body of work through demonstrated knowledge of it, perhaps by referencing specific papers in a conference question. But the question itself challenges a minor assumption, proposes an extension, or suggests a novel application. The respect frames the intellectual confidence as collaboration rather than challenge. Your practical implementation requires precise calibration across multiple dimensions. First, master the language of respect. Learn the appropriate forms of address for different contexts. Research whether someone prefers their title, first name, or some combination in different settings. Arrive punctually. Express gratitude genuinely but concisely. These signals of respect cost you nothing and purchase significant goodwill. Second, identify your domains of legitimate confidence. You are not an expert in everything, but you are developing expertise in specific areas. Within those areas, speak with quiet confidence. State your analysis clearly, support it with evidence, but frame it as contribution, not correction. Use phrases like, "Building on your point about X, I've found that Y," rather than, "Actually, the data shows." Finally, monitor feedback continuously. Different powerful individuals have different tolerance for directness. Some appreciate candor, others prefer more cushioned delivery. Adjust your calibration based on their responses, seeking that optimal point where they perceive you as respectful but not weak, confident but not presumptuous. The fourth law, become a student of their desires, not your own. The fundamental error most people commit when attempting to connect with the powerful is projection. They imagine that powerful people want what they themselves want, value what they themselves value, or respond to incentives that would motivate them. This is catastrophically wrong. Power transforms psychology. The motivations that drive someone struggling to establish themselves differ radically from the motivations that drive someone who has already achieved success. Machiavelli emphasized that effective princes must be psychologists, capable of understanding the true desires hidden beneath stated intentions. To create genuine connections with powerful people, you must develop this same skill. You must excavate their authentic motivations, which are often invisible to casual observation. The psychological principle underlying this law involves theory of mind and the curse of knowledge. Theory of mind is our capacity to model other people's mental states, to recognize that they possess beliefs, desires, and intentions distinct from our own. But this capacity operates imperfectly, particularly across status differences. Research in cognitive psychology demonstrates that people systematically underestimate how differently others perceive the world. The curse of knowledge refers to our inability to remember what it was like not to know something we now know. When you have achieved a certain level, you forget the psychology of that achievement. You reinterpret your past motivations through your present lens. This is why wealthy individuals often give terrible advice to people starting out. They've forgotten what actually motivated them in those early stages, replacing authentic memory with narrative reconstruction. For those seeking connections with the powerful, this creates an opportunity. If you can accurately model what truly motivates a powerful person, not what they claim motivates them, not what would motivate you, but what genuinely drives their decisions, you become capable of offering value that others cannot perceive. The historical master of this principle was Cardinal Richelieu, chief minister to King Louis XIII of France in the 17th century. When Richelieu first entered the king's service, France was weak, surrounded by powerful Habsburg enemies in Spain and Austria. Many advisors told the king what they thought he should want: military glory, territorial expansion, increased personal power. But Richelieu studied Louis XV with scientific precision. He observed that the young king was deeply insecure, overshadowed by his mother's regency, and uncertain of his own capability. Louis did not primarily desire glory. He desired escape from perpetual anxiety about threats to his authority. Richelieu positioned himself not as the minister who would make Louis great, but as the minister who would eliminate the sources of Louis's anxiety. He identified domestic threats, rebellious nobles, Huguenot political power, conspiracies within the court, and systematically dismantled them. He framed foreign policy not as expansion for glory, but as eliminating the Habsburg encirclement that threatened French security. By aligning his service precisely with Louis's actual psychological needs rather than abstract royal ambitions, Richelieu became indispensable. The king defended him against numerous conspiracies and allowed him unprecedented power because Richelieu provided something no other advisor could: genuine psychological security. In contemporary settings, this law demands sophisticated observation and inference. Consider the ambitious professional seeking to connect with a successful tech CEO. The naive approach focuses on what seems obvious. The CEO wants innovation, wants growth, wants profit. But these are generic. What does this specific CEO actually desire? Perhaps they have already achieved financial success beyond their capacity to spend. Perhaps their true desire is legacy, the need to be remembered as someone who changed the world rather than merely became wealthy. Or perhaps they are driven by a need to prove wrong the investors who rejected their first venture. Or perhaps they are competing psychologically with a specific rival, and every decision is evaluated through that lens. These authentic motivations are discoverable through careful research, reading interviews for emotional tells, studying the pattern of their decisions, noting what they choose to discuss unprompted. The person who understands these deeper motivations can offer value that resonates at a fundamental level. If legacy is the true motivation, you do not pitch profitable opportunity. You pitch historically significant transformation of industry. If the motivation is proving skeptics wrong, you frame your contribution as ammunition in that ongoing validation. Your practical arsenal begins with investigative research. Before approaching anyone powerful, consume everything publicly available about them. But read not for information, but for psychology. What topics make them animated in interviews? What achievements do they mention repeatedly? What slights do they return to years later? These patterns reveal authentic motivation. Second, conduct small tests. In initial interactions, propose 2 or 3 different framings for the same idea, each appealing to a different possible motivation. Observe which framing generates the strongest response. This reveals their true value hierarchy. Finally, practice perspective-taking systematically. Spend time genuinely imagining their daily experience, their concerns, their fears. Not what you would fear in their position, but what someone with their history, personality, and current circumstances likely fears. This is not manipulation. This is genuine understanding, and it is the foundation of all meaningful human connection. Those who master this law stop shouting into the void about what they want to offer and start whispering precisely what the powerful actually need to hear. We have now established the foundational principles that govern access to power. You have learned that approaching the powerful requires suppressing your natural instinct to shine brightest, that you must present yourself as solution rather than supplicant, that deference without servility creates respect, and that understanding their authentic desires rather than projecting your own determines whether you provide value they actually seek. These are the defensive principles, the foundations that prevent catastrophic errors. They teach you how not to repel power, how to avoid triggering the immune response that powerful people have developed against those who threaten them or waste their time. But foundation is not mastery. What we have covered, protects you from rejection. What comes next enables active cultivation of powerful connections. The laws we are about to explore operate at a more sophisticated level. They are not merely about avoiding mistakes, but about engineering perception, creating strategic dependencies, and positioning yourself so that powerful people come to view you not as an acceptable acquaintance, but as an essential ally. These advanced laws require more courage because they demand active manipulation of social dynamics rather than passive adaptation to them. They require greater skill because the margin for error narrows when you move from defense to offense. The distinction is crucial. Everything you have learned thus far allows you to survive in proximity to power. What follows allows you to thrive, to transform access into alliance, presence into indispensability. But understand this: these tools are sharp. They can elevate you rapidly, but wielded clumsily, they can sever connections you have carefully cultivated. The foundational laws protect against rejection. The advanced laws create attraction, but risk backlash. Proceed with full awareness that you are entering more dangerous territory, where the rewards scale with the risks. The powerful may forgive someone who is merely unimpressive. They rarely forgive someone who attempts manipulation and fails, because failed manipulation reveals hostile intent. Part 2. The Advanced Tactics. The fifth law. Create strategic scarcity around your availability. One of the most counterintuitive truths about connecting with powerful people is that excessive availability destroys perceived value. The logic seems backwards. Surely making yourself constantly accessible demonstrates dedication and increases opportunities for connection. But human psychology operates according to principles of scarcity and social proof. We value what is difficult to obtain precisely because its scarcity signals quality. When you make yourself perpetually available, you communicate that you have no other demands on your time, that other powerful people have not claimed your attention, that you are not, in fact, valuable. Machiavelli observed that princes respect those who treat with them as equals, who demonstrate they possess alternatives and therefore engage from choice rather than desperation. The psychological mechanism derives from multiple cognitive biases working in concert. First, the scarcity heuristic. Humans evolved in environments where rare resources were typically more valuable than abundant ones. This created a mental shortcut where scarcity itself becomes a signal of value. When someone is difficult to access, our brains automatically infer they must be valuable, otherwise others would not be competing for their time. Second, social proof. We look to others' behavior to determine value. If everyone can access someone immediately, it suggests no one else values access to them. If access is restricted, we infer that others have already recognized and claimed their value. Third, reactance theory. Humans possess a need for autonomy and freedom. When something becomes scarce or restricted, we experience psychological reactance, increased desire for the restricted object, specifically because restriction threatens our freedom to obtain it. Applied to social connections, scarcity of access triggers all three mechanisms. The person who is difficult to reach is automatically perceived as more valuable than the person who responds to every message within minutes. The exemplar of this principle is Henry Kissinger, who served as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State under Presidents Nixon and Ford. Kissinger understood that his power derived not from his official position alone, but from perceived indispensability. He deliberately cultivated an image of overwhelming demand. His schedule was legendarily packed. Ambassadors waited weeks for meetings. When he did grant access, it was brief, focused, and often interrupted by supposedly urgent matters. Kissinger would frequently have his secretary interrupt meetings to announce that another world leader was on the phone, forcing the current meeting to pause. This was theater, carefully orchestrated. The constant scarcity of Kissinger's time communicated that everyone needed him, that he operated at the center of global affairs, that access to him was a privilege. This perception became self-fulfilling. Leaders competed for his attention precisely because access was difficult, which further increased his actual power. When Kissinger called, presidents and prime ministers took the call immediately because reciprocal scarcity would risk being shut out from his network. Kissinger transformed time management into statecraft, understanding that controlling access to himself was equivalent to controlling a valuable strategic resource. In modern professional contexts, this law manifests across every domain where gatekeeping matters. The consultant who responds to every inquiry immediately signals they have excess capacity, which suggests their services are not in demand, which makes potential clients skeptical about quality. The consultant who indicates that they might have availability in 6 weeks, pending current client commitments, signals the opposite. Both may have identical expertise, but the second triggers the scarcity heuristic. The creative professional who accepts every project offered appears desperate. The one who evaluates whether a project aligns with their current direction and sometimes declines appears selective, which suggests quality standards. Even in employment contexts, candidates who appear to have multiple opportunities generate more aggressive recruiting efforts than identically qualified candidates who signal that this is their only option. The mechanism is consistent. Scarcity creates perceived value, which creates actual value through altered behavior from the powerful. Your practical implementation requires careful calibration because this law can backfire spectacularly if executed poorly. First, establish legitimate scarcity. You cannot fabricate being busy if you have produced nothing. The deception will be discovered. Instead, genuinely build a portfolio of commitments. Take on projects, develop skills, create obligations that actually demand your time. This creates authentic scarcity and, crucially, means you have genuine alternatives if any particular connection with power fails to develop. Second, communicate scarcity gracefully. The goal is not to be rude or dismissive. When someone powerful reaches out, you respond, but you indicate constraints. I'm very interested in this conversation. I'm currently finishing a commitment until the 15th, but I could set aside time the following week if that works for your schedule. This acknowledges their importance while signaling your time has value. Third, when you do grant access, be fully present. The scarcity must be genuine. When you are available, you must deliver sufficient value that people understand why access to you is competed for. Scarcity without substance is briefly effective but ultimately fraudulent, and powerful people are experts at detecting fraud. Master this law, and you transform from someone grateful for any attention to someone whose attention others seek to capture. The sixth law: leverage the power of strategic association. Powerful people do not exist in isolation. They exist within networks, and their perception of you will be dramatically influenced by how you are positioned within those networks. Machiavelli emphasized that a prince's reputation often depended less on his own qualities than on the company he kept and the alliances he formed. To connect effectively with power, you must understand network effects and deliberately engineer your social positioning. You must become associated with quality, with success, with other powerful individuals, because humans use association as a primary heuristic for evaluation. We assume that impressive people associate with other impressive people, and we extend our evaluation of known quantities to unknown quantities through their connections. The cognitive mechanism is associative priming and stereotype-based inference. The human brain manages complexity through categorization and association. When we encounter someone new, we cannot evaluate them comprehensively. That would require too much cognitive effort. Instead, we look for shortcuts. One of the most powerful shortcuts is social association. Who vouches for this person? Who do they associate with? What organizations claim them as members? These associations activate related concepts in our semantic networks. If you are introduced by someone prestigious, you inherit a portion of their prestige through association. If you work at a high-status organization, you are assumed to possess the qualities that organization selects for. This is not logical. You, as an individual, might be an exception. But human cognition prioritizes efficiency over accuracy. We would rather be approximately right quickly than precisely right slowly. For those seeking to connect with power, this creates a strategic imperative. Your actual qualities matter less in initial evaluation than your associative markers. Once you gain access through strong associations, you can then demonstrate your actual qualities. But without the associative markers, you may never get the opportunity to demonstrate anything. Consider the rise of Alexander Hamilton in early American history. Hamilton was born illegitimate on a small Caribbean island, orphaned young, with no family wealth or connections. By any measure, he should have remained obscure. But Hamilton possessed strategic brilliance in leveraging association. As a young man, he wrote essays that impressed local businessmen who funded his passage to New York for education. At King's College, he deliberately cultivated relationships with sons of prominent families. When the Revolution began, Hamilton used his education and rhetorical skills to gain a position as artillery captain. But his true breakthrough came through strategic positioning. He maneuvered himself into the role of aide-de-camp to General George Washington, the commander of the Continental Army. This single association transformed everything. Hamilton was now Washington's man, a member of the most powerful network in America. When Washington became president, Hamilton leveraged that association to become the first Secretary of the Treasury, despite being only 32 and facing intense opposition. Hamilton's proposals carried weight not merely on their merits, but because he spoke with Washington's implicit backing. He used association with Washington to build associations with other Federalists, creating a network that dominated early American politics. Hamilton's actual brilliance was considerable, but brilliance alone would have left him obscure. Strategic association gave him the platform where brilliance could be recognized and deployed. In contemporary contexts, this law explains the extraordinary importance of prestigious educational institutions, elite professional service firms, and recognized brand-name companies. The person who graduates from Harvard does not necessarily possess more ability than the person who graduates from a state university, but they receive systematically different opportunities because the Harvard Association triggers assumptions about quality, intelligence, and ambition. The consultant from McKinsey is not necessarily more insightful than an independent consultant with equivalent experience, but they are more likely to be hired by Fortune 500 CEOs because the McKinsey brand serves as a risk reduction signal. Even within organizations, those who work on high-profile projects or serve on committees with senior leadership gain disproportionate advancement opportunities because they become associated with importance through proximity. Your practical arsenal for leveraging this law operates across 3 timescales. In the immediate term, optimize your introduction and presentation. When meeting powerful people, engineer your introduction to emphasize your strongest associations. I worked on Project X with Dr. Y, rather than just, I worked on Project X. Every resume, LinkedIn profile, and personal website should be architected to highlight associative markers, recognized organizations, prominent individuals who supervised you, prestigious accomplishments that carry institutional validation. This is not deception, it is strategic emphasis. In the medium term, deliberately pursue positions and projects that carry strong associative value, even if they offer lower immediate compensation. The person who spends 2 years at a prestigious but lower-paying organization builds associative capital that generates returns for decades. Finally, in the long term, systematically build relationships with multiple influential individuals across different domains. These connections serve two purposes: direct value through access to their resources and networks, and indirect value through association. When Person A introduces you to Person B as someone you should know, you inherit credibility through A's endorsement. Master the art of strategic association, and you accelerate your access to power exponentially because you borrow the credibility others spent decades building. The seventh law: demonstrate loyalty before it is tested. Powerful people operate in environments of perpetual uncertainty. They face competitors who seek to undermine them, subordinates who might betray them, and allies whose loyalty remains questionable until tested. In such environments, the individual who demonstrates loyalty proactively, before being asked, before being tested, in contexts where betrayal would be easy and perhaps profitable, creates extraordinary value. Machiavelli wrote that princes must carefully distinguish between those who serve from fear, who will abandon them in adversity, and those who serve from genuine alignment, who can be trusted in crisis. The person who signals genuine loyalty early, through costly actions rather than cheap words, positions themselves as the rarest and most valuable resource in the ecosystem of power, a trustworthy ally. The psychology of loyalty involves costly signaling theory and the evolutionary logic of reciprocal altruism. Cheap signals, words, promises, expressions of support that cost nothing, provide minimal information because anyone can produce them regardless of actual intent. Costly signals, actions that involve sacrifice, risk, or the foregoing of alternative opportunities, provide credible information because only those with genuine commitment will bear the cost. In evolutionary terms, reciprocal altruism succeeds only when both parties can trust that cooperation will be reciprocated rather than exploited. Humans evolved sophisticated mechanisms for detecting true commitment versus mimicry of commitment. We look for costly signals. The person who defends you only when it is safe provides minimal information. The person who defends you when doing so carries personal risk, demonstrates genuine loyalty. Powerful people who have experienced countless false displays of loyalty become expert at distinguishing between cheap and costly signals. They have learned through bitter experience that everyone claims loyalty when times are good. Only genuine allies remain loyal when loyalty becomes expensive. The historical exemplar is Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, friend and general to Augustus Caesar, the first emperor of Rome. Agrippa was Augustus's closest companion from youth, and their relationship survived decades precisely because Agrippa demonstrated loyalty through costly actions repeatedly. When Augustus faced the combined forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium, Agrippa commanded the fleet. He won a decisive victory, which secured Augustus's control of the Roman world. But here is what made Agrippa extraordinary. He possessed the military reputation, the loyalty of legions, and the strategic position to potentially claim power for himself. Rome had a long history of generals seizing power. Yet Agrippa never attempted it. Instead, he systematically directed credit for victories to Augustus. When Augustus needed a loyal administrator to govern complex provinces, Agrippa accepted assignments that took him far from the center of power, positions where his military competence was wasted on administration, but where his loyalty removed potential rivals and secured crucial regions. He married Augustus's daughter Julia, binding himself to Augustus's dynasty rather than establishing his own. These were costly signals. Agrippa forfeited opportunities for personal glory and independent power in order to demonstrate absolute commitment to Augustus's success. The result was that Augustus trusted Agrippa with authority no one else received. When Augustus needed to temporarily relinquish power due to illness, he gave his signet ring, effectively control of the empire, to Agrippa, not to any family member. Agrippa's loyalty, demonstrated through years of costly choices, made him indispensable. In modern organizational contexts, this law operates through similar dynamics. The junior employee who, during a crisis when the executive is being criticized, publicly defends the decision and takes partial responsibility for implementation challenges, signals genuine loyalty because criticism is flowing and association carries cost. The business partner who, when offered an opportunity to work with a competitor at higher compensation, declines and informs you of the approach, demonstrates loyalty through revealed preference. They chose alignment over profit. The colleague who, in a meeting where undermining you would advance their own position, instead supports your proposal and adds credibility to it, provides costly signal of alliance. These actions communicate commitment far more powerfully than any statement of loyalty ever could. The crucial sophistication in this law is timing and authenticity. Demonstrated loyalty must precede the moment when it is desperately needed. If you wait until the powerful person is in crisis to show loyalty, your motives remain ambiguous. Perhaps you are loyal, or perhaps you are simply calculating that supporting them remains your best option. But if you demonstrate loyalty when they are strong, when alternative paths exist, when supporting them provides no immediate benefit, you establish genuine commitment. Furthermore, the loyalty must be authentic, not performative. Powerful people possess finely tuned sensors for manipulation. They have encountered countless individuals who performed loyalty while awaiting opportunities for betrayal. The loyalty that creates genuine connection must be rooted in actual alignment, shared values, complementary goals, mutual respect. You cannot fake this long term. The person who chooses loyalty as pure strategy without underlying authentic alignment will eventually be exposed when a sufficiently attractive alternative emerges. Your practical implementation begins with alignment assessment. Before demonstrating costly loyalty, ensure genuine alignment exists. Ask yourself, do I actually believe in this person's vision, or am I performing belief? If the answer is performance, this relationship is strategic rather than loyal, and you should treat it accordingly, useful but not binding. For relationships where genuine alignment exists, seek opportunities for costly demonstration. This might mean defending their position in a forum where others are criticizing and your defense associates you with potential failure. It might mean forgoing an opportunity that would advance you, but that conflicts with their interests. It might mean investing your time in their success when that investment carries opportunity cost. The second tactical element is discretion. Genuine loyalty does not require public performance. In fact, the most powerful demonstrations often occur in private contexts, where the powerful person learns you defended them in their absence, supported them without seeking credit, or sacrificed opportunity without demanding recognition. These private demonstrations carry maximum signal strength because they eliminate the possibility of performative motive. Finally, understand the reciprocity timeline. Demonstrated loyalty is an investment with uncertain return timing. You may demonstrate loyalty for extended periods before the powerful person has opportunity or inclination to reciprocate. This requires patience and genuine commitment, but when reciprocation comes, it often comes in forms far more valuable than the accumulated cost of your loyalty. The powerful person who trusts you completely grants access and authority that money cannot purchase. Master this law, and you transform from ally of convenience into trusted confidant. The eighth law: become the bridge between worlds. Powerful people operate within specific domains, industries, social circles, geographic regions, intellectual traditions. Despite their power within these domains, they face a persistent limitation, they lack deep access to other domains that might contain valuable information, opportunities, or alliances. The person who can serve as a bridge between different worlds, translating between contexts, facilitating connections across boundaries, and importing insights from one domain into another, creates unique and substantial value. Machiavelli himself exemplified this principle, serving as a bridge between the world of Renaissance diplomacy and classical political philosophy, translating ancient Roman strategies into contemporary Italian statecraft. The bridge position is powerful because it is structurally scarce. Most people operate entirely within a single domain, developing deep expertise but narrow networks. The structural principle derives from social network theory, specifically the concept of structural holes identified by sociologist Ronald Burt. Networks contain dense clusters of connections within groups, but relatively few connections between groups. The positions that bridge these structural holes possess disproportionate power and access to novel information. People within a dense cluster share largely redundant information. Everyone knows roughly what everyone else knows. But the person positioned between two clusters accesses non-redundant information from both. They see opportunities for synthesis, combination, and arbitrage that specialists within either cluster cannot perceive. Additionally, bridge positions confer brokerage power, the ability to control, facilitate, or extract value from flows between the clusters. Powerful people, despite their success within their domain, recognize the limitation of domain-specific knowledge. They understand that transformative innovations often come from cross-domain insight. The person who can reliably provide access to different worlds becomes strategically valuable in ways that domain specialists cannot replicate. The historical master of this principle is Benjamin Franklin, who created extraordinary influence by positioning himself as a bridge between multiple worlds simultaneously. Franklin bridged the American colonies and European intellectual society, maintaining correspondence with leading scientists and philosophers in England and France while operating businesses in Philadelphia. This position allowed him to import Enlightenment ideas to America and export American perspectives to Europe. He bridged the worlds of commerce and science, operating a successful printing business while conducting pioneering research in electricity. He bridged high and low society, equally comfortable conversing with aristocrats and artisans. When the American Revolution required diplomatic support, Franklin was the obvious choice to represent American interests in France. He succeeded spectacularly because he could bridge multiple worlds simultaneously. He presented American cause using Enlightenment philosophical principles that resonated with French intellectuals. He cultivated alliances with French aristocrats by understanding court culture from his years interfacing with British society. He negotiated commercial treaties by understanding both American economic needs and European trade dynamics. Franklin was not the most brilliant scientist, the wealthiest businessman, or the most sophisticated diplomat of his era. But his unique positioning as a bridge between multiple worlds made him irreplaceable. No one else possessed his combination of access and understanding across diverse domains. In contemporary contexts, this law explains the extraordinary value of certain cosmopolitan positions. The consultant who has worked in both technology and healthcare can identify opportunities for digital health innovation that pure technology specialists and pure healthcare specialists both miss. The executive who has experience in both Eastern and Western business cultures can facilitate partnerships that others cannot navigate. The academic who maintains connections in both research and industry can translate laboratory discoveries into commercial applications. The person who operates comfortably in both technical and creative domains can lead design-driven technology companies. Each of these positions creates value precisely through bridging structural holes that most specialists never cross. Your practical arsenal for implementing this law requires deliberate portfolio construction across 3 dimensions. First, develop genuine depth in at least one domain before attempting to bridge. You must be credible within at least one world before you can serve as a trustworthy bridge to others. Shallow knowledge across many domains makes you a dilettante, not a bridge. Second, systematically expand into adjacent domains. Identify worlds that intersect with your primary domain, but that most specialists in your field ignore. Invest time developing genuine understanding, not tourist-level familiarity, but sufficient depth that you can engage meaningfully with specialists in that domain. This might mean learning a second language to access a different geographic market, developing technical skills to understand an adjacent industry, or cultivating relationships in a different social stratum. Third, make your bridge position visible and useful. Actively facilitate introductions between people from different domains who could benefit from connection. Translate insights from one world into the language of another. Identify opportunities for synthesis that specialists within single domains cannot perceive. The powerful people you seek to connect with will recognize the unique value you provide when you consistently bring them insights, opportunities, or connections they could not access through their existing networks. Master this law, and you transform from one specialist among many into the rare individual who expands the powerful person's reach beyond their natural boundaries. The 9th law: create mechanisms of mutual dependence. The ultimate form of connection with powerful people transcends simple alliance or even demonstrated loyalty. It is the creation of structural interdependence, where your success and their success become genuinely intertwined, where harming you would harm them, and where your advancement serves their interests directly. Machiavelli understood that the most stable political relationships were not based on affection or even respect, but on mutual self-interest, reinforced by structural dependence. The ally who helps you because they like you will abandon you when liking fades or when helping becomes costly. The ally who helps you because your failure would damage them will defend you even when they dislike you because self-interest compels it. The psychological and structural principle involves game theory and the economics of switching costs. In game theory, the most stable cooperative outcomes occur in repeated games where both parties benefit from continued cooperation, and both would suffer from defection. Single-shot interactions invite betrayal because there is no future punishment for breaking trust. But when parties are locked into long-term interdependence, betrayal becomes irrational. The short-term gain from defection is overwhelmed by the long-term cost of destroyed cooperation. Switching costs reinforce this dynamic. If replacing you would require the powerful person to invest significant resources in finding, vetting, and training an alternative, the switching cost creates a protective barrier around your position. You become retained not merely because you provide value, but because replacing you would be expensive and risky. The combination of positive interdependence and high switching costs creates what economists call lock-in, a state where changing the relationship would be costly enough that maintaining it becomes the rational choice even if superior alternatives theoretically exist. The exemplar of this principle is J. Edgar Hoover, who served as director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 48 years, from 1924 until his death in 1972. Hoover's longevity and power derived not from personal charm — he was difficult, paranoid, and authoritarian — but from his masterful creation of mutual dependence. Hoover systematically collected information on every powerful person in Washington: presidents, senators, congressmen, judges, and influential private citizens. His files contained evidence of affairs, financial improprieties, embarrassing associations, and compromising communications. But Hoover rarely used this information for direct blackmail. Instead, he created a more subtle dynamic. Powerful people knew Hoover possessed damaging information about them. They also knew that Hoover's continued power protected the confidentiality of that information. If Hoover were fired or marginalized, his files might be exposed or fall into hostile hands. Therefore, the powerful had vested interest in maintaining Hoover's position. Simultaneously, Hoover made himself genuinely useful. The FBI, under his direction, did provide valuable services, investigating crimes, gathering intelligence, protecting against espionage. Powerful people depended on Hoover's cooperation for legitimate purposes. Presidents needed FBI resources for national security matters. Congressmen needed FBI assistance with investigations in their districts. This created positive dependence alongside the negative dependence of mutual compromise. The result was that multiple presidents, despite personally disliking Hoover and disagreeing with his methods, retained him in power. He had engineered a position where firing him carried unacceptable costs while keeping him carried acceptable benefits. He transformed himself from subordinate into structural fixture. In modern professional contexts, this principle manifests in less dramatic but structurally similar ways. The technology specialist who designs custom systems for an organization, systems that only they fully understand and can maintain, creates switching costs that protect their position. The rainmaker who brings clients to a professional services firm based on personal relationships that would not transfer if they left creates mutual dependence. The firm needs them to retain clients, but they need the firm's resources to service those clients. The chief of staff who becomes the sole repository of the executive's preferences, relationships, and confidential information makes themselves difficult to replace because training a successor would require the executive to reveal and transfer vast amounts of sensitive knowledge. The business partner who negotiates deals where payment flows through structures that require both parties' cooperation to unwind creates financial interdependence. Your practical implementation of this law requires careful ethical navigation because the line between mutual dependence and coercive entrapment is real and significant. The goal is to create legitimate interdependence where both parties genuinely benefit from cooperation, not to create hostage situations through manufactured vulnerability. First, develop specialized expertise or relationships that are genuinely valuable but difficult to replicate. This might mean becoming the expert in a complex technical system, developing deep relationships with key stakeholders, or creating intellectual property that benefits both you and the powerful person. The key is that the value must be real. You are not creating false dependence through information asymmetry, but genuine dependence through legitimate specialization. Second, integrate yourself into critical workflows and decision processes. Volunteer for roles that place you at the intersection of important information flows. Become the person who facilitates key relationships or manages essential projects. The goal is to make yourself a load-bearing element in the structure, where removing you would require significant reorganization. Third, align your long-term interests explicitly with the powerful person's long-term interests. This might involve equity stakes, long-term contracts with significant penalties for early termination, or shared projects where both parties' reputations are jointly attached to outcomes. The most stable form of interdependence is not based on threat or friction, but on genuine alignment where your success genuinely advances their success. When you achieve this, you transcend the status of employee or contractor and become partner, because the relationship structure itself compels mutual support. The 10th law, master the rhythm of advance and retreat. The final advance law concerns timing and psychological dynamics across extended relationships. Powerful people are accustomed to subordinates who either maintain constant, predictable availability, or who disappear entirely when not needed. Both patterns become background noise, expected, unremarkable, easily replaced. The person who masters a more sophisticated rhythm, who advances when opportunity exists and retreats strategically to create space, maintains psychological salience, and avoids the familiarity that breeds contempt. Machiavelli observed that even the most valued advisor could lose influence through excessive presence, while absence could renew appreciation. The art lies in calibrating the rhythm of engagement to maintain optimal position in the powerful person's attention and regard. The psychological principle involves habituation, reactance, and the peak-end rule from behavioral economics. Habituation describes how repeated exposure to any stimulus reduces response intensity. The novel captures attention. The familiar fades to background. When you maintain constant presence, you become part of the environmental furniture, necessary perhaps, but not consciously valued. Absence breaks habituation, creating the possibility of renewed appreciation when you return. Reactance theory suggests that people value their autonomy and resist feeling controlled. If you are always available, always present, always seeking engagement, the powerful person may experience subtle reactance, a feeling that you are imposing on their time or limiting their freedom. Strategic retreat removes this pressure, paradoxically making your presence more welcome when you do engage. The peak-end rule demonstrates that people judge experiences based primarily on their most intense moment and their ending, not on the average across time. By controlling the rhythm of your engagement, you can ensure that interactions tend to end on high notes and that your most valuable contributions create peak moments, shaping the powerful person's overall assessment of the relationship. History provides illustration in the relationship between Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt during World War II. Churchill needed American support desperately. Britain faced potential defeat without American arms and eventual military intervention. But Churchill understood that constant supplication would erode his position and Roosevelt's respect. Instead, Churchill calibrated a sophisticated rhythm. He would advance with passionate advocacy, pressing Roosevelt for specific commitments, deploying his full rhetorical force. Then he would retreat, shifting to other topics, giving Roosevelt space to process and decide without feeling pressured. When Roosevelt made even partial concessions, Churchill would celebrate them effusively, creating peak moments of apparent satisfaction, then retreat again. This rhythm served multiple functions. It prevented Roosevelt from experiencing Churchill as a constant drain on attention and resources. It created psychological space where Roosevelt could feel he was making autonomous decisions rather than yielding to pressure. It ensured that Churchill's most intense advocacy was reserved for moments of genuine importance, maintaining its impact through scarcity. The rhythm of advance and retreat kept Churchill salient in Roosevelt's mind without triggering the fatigue and reactance that constant presence would have created. In contemporary professional relationships, this law governs the sustainability of long-term connections with powerful mentors, clients, or partners. The protege who contacts their mentor weekly with updates and requests rapidly exhausts goodwill and risks being perceived as needy. The protege who appears quarterly with significant progress to report and a single, well-formed question maintains value and respect. The consultant who is constantly pitching new projects to a client may win some engagements but also creates fatigue. The consultant who delivers exceptional work then becomes scarce while working on other clients' projects, creates anticipation and renewed appreciation when they become available again. The business partner who is always present in the office may be reliable, but they don't create the psychological dynamic of being missed. The partner who strategically works remotely or travels for other opportunities creates appreciation for their presence when they do engage directly. Your practical implementation requires metacognitive awareness of relationship dynamics and disciplined timing. First, monitor engagement intensity and watch for subtle signals of satiation. If the powerful person's response times lengthen, if their engagement seems more perfunctory, if they mention being busy more frequently, these may signal that you are approaching habituation or reactance thresholds. These signals call for strategic retreat, not increased effort. Second, calibrate your rhythm to their natural attention cycles. Some people prefer intense bursts of interaction, followed by extended autonomous work periods. Others prefer steady, moderate-frequency contact. Observe and match their natural rhythm rather than imposing your own. Third, create clear peaks in your value delivery. Don't distribute your best work evenly across time. Instead, create moments of exceptional value delivery that stand out against baseline engagement. These peaks become the memorable moments that shape overall relationship assessment. Finally, master the exit. End interactions slightly before the powerful person is ready for them to end, while energy and engagement remain high. Leave them wanting slightly more rather than relieved that the interaction is concluding. This ending state shapes their overall memory of the interaction and increases willingness to engage next time. We have traversed Machiavelli's architecture of power, from its foundations to its most sophisticated applications. You now possess not merely rules, but a coherent system for navigating the complex social dynamics that govern access to influence and authority. But knowledge without integration remains academic. The true test is synthesis, the capacity to deploy these laws not as isolated tactics, but as an integrated strategic framework adapted to specific contexts and relationships. The master insight is that these laws operate in dynamic interaction, not isolation. The rhythm of advance and retreat amplifies strategic scarcity. Demonstrated loyalty becomes more powerful when combined with bridge positioning. Strategic deference preserves relationships while you create mechanisms of dependence. The person who internalizes these principles does not mechanically apply each law in sequence. Instead, they develop a sophisticated intuition for which principles apply, in which contexts, how to combine them for compounding effects, and when certain laws must temporarily yield to others based on situational demands. But with this knowledge comes ethical responsibility. These laws are powerful precisely because they work. They describe actual dynamics of human psychology and social structure, tested across centuries. They can elevate you from obscurity to influence with shocking speed if applied with skill. Yet power without purpose is ultimately hollow, and manipulation without authentic commitment corrupts both the manipulator and the relationship. The wise student of Machiavelli understands that these laws serve best when deployed from a foundation of genuine value creation and authentic alignment. Use them not to exploit the powerful through deception, but to navigate toward mutually beneficial relationships more effectively. Use them to overcome the artificial barriers of status and access that prevent genuine talent from connecting with opportunity. Use them to accelerate the recognition you deserve for the value you actually provide. The world will never be a pure meritocracy where ability alone determines outcomes. Social dynamics, psychology, and network effects will always influence who rises and who stagnates. You can lament this reality or master it. You can wish the game had different rules or learn to play the actual game with skill and integrity. Machiavelli offered no apologies for describing the world as it is, rather than as it should be. 500 years later, his observations remain uncomfortably accurate because he identified patterns rooted in fundamental human nature, patterns that transcend specific historical contexts. You stand now at a threshold. Behind you lies the comfortable ignorance of believing that competence and hard work alone will earn you access to power and opportunity. That illusion is shattered. Ahead lies the more demanding path of strategic sophistication, where you consciously shape how others perceive you, deliberately cultivate relationships according to psychological principles, and actively engineer your position within social structures. This path requires more effort, more awareness, more discipline. But it also offers something the naive path never provides: agency over your own advancement, the capacity to systematically create connections with powerful people who can transform your trajectory. The choice, as it has always been, is yours. But you cannot return to ignorance. The laws are known, the architecture is revealed. What you build with this knowledge will be determined not by what you now know, but by how you choose to apply it. Go forth and climb wisely. Don't forget to give a like or a hype and subscribe to the channel. Watch the next video to complete everything you just learned.